Welcome everybody. I see that you are joining us, coming into the room, and there is a poll that's up. If you could give us a little bit of feedback, let us know your experience and what is bringing you to join us on this call. I would appreciate it. We are also going to be streaming live on Facebook, so if you have somebody else that you know that wants to go ahead and catch the presentation, we do post that. We also will be sending out the 10 tips for improving brain health at the end of the program. So we look forward to sending that out to you. We'll just wait a couple more minutes and then we'll introduce our presenters. If you have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the question and answer section or chat them for me. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close down the polling. I appreciate everybody joining us, and I look forward to getting to know you getting to know us a little bit. Okay, welcome everybody to the Enhanced Protocol Hope for Brain Health presentation by the Summit at Sunland Springs and A Mind for All Seasons. We are delighted to be joined by Eric Collette, the CEO of A Mind for All Seasons, and who partner with us to put together the enhanced protocol that we offer at the Summit at Sunland Springs. We also are joined by Robeson Flynn, who is the memory coach at the Summit at Sunland Springs. So without further ado, we will have Eric go ahead and kick it off and take us through the enhanced protocol, Hope for Brain Health.
All right, sorry, I had to get unmuted there. Hopefully you can hear me just fine. Lori and Robeson, I appreciate the chance to be with you and all of you watching. Thanks for taking some time today to be with us. I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic and tell you some of the amazing things that have come out in the last few years that allow us to have real hope for taking care of our brains and the brains of those that we love. I want to share with you a little story about some people that I love. These are my paternal grandparents, Ralph and Irene Collette. Now, they passed away many years ago, but as I was growing up, I had the kind of loving experiences with them that a lot of people have with their grandparents. I loved to go visit them and hear stories of the things that they had experienced, and I was impressed with different things about them. My grandfather, who had been a homesteader for years and farmed over 400 acres, could fix anything. He was very creative and very insightful in a mechanical way. And my grandma, Irene Collette, had such a memory that she could talk you through the year, starting in January, and rattle off the grandchildren and children and even great-grandchildren's birthdays, day, month, year, going all through the year off the top of her head. It always amazed me when I was growing up because I just didn't have that ability. As they got older, though, they started having some things that made me a little bit worried, and they made their children a little bit worried. And their experience was very similar to what a lot of millions of families actually, have gone through. My grandmother in particular started to get more and more confused over time. And she could no longer repeat all those birthdays. And she would get lost in what she was saying. She would forget what word to use. And at first, we all just kind of chalked it up to, well, grandma's getting a little bit older. But eventually things got bad enough that her children were worried enough to take her to the doctor's office. And the doctor did a little bit of testing and said, well, she's got some dementia. Could be vascular dementia, could be Alzheimer's disease. We're not sure, but she has some dementia. She is getting older, and there wasn't a lot that they could offer. And progressively, my grandmother got so bad that toward the end of her life, she was staying with an aunt and uncle, and she could get up from her bed in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. The bathroom was maybe 10 feet away, and she would get lost on the way to the bathroom. It was a devastating thing to watch her sink into that horrible decline where she didn't remember her family members, and she had no sense of orientation to where she was. My grandfather became a type 2 diabetic, and as his diabetes got worse and worse, so did his memory and his cognitive functioning in general. So he was quite confused by the end of his life. And the healthcare system really didn't have a lot to offer them. As far as what could be done for them, well, there was a little bit of medication that didn't have much benefit. And the doctors that they went to didn't have much to tell them or the family. And so my family's experience caring for them was really what a lot of people's experience has been. Slow, progressive decline over several years until eventually they were not very oriented and they needed full-time help. They spent a little bit of time in assisted living, and then they spent the rest of the time with some of their children who were caring for them. So our healthcare system really has not had a lot to offer people in those situations. I have spent the last 20 years working with people living with dementia. About 16 of that has been spent running assisted living and memory care settings. And I have watched thousands of families go through this experience of seeing a loved one decline very, very slowly. And I've cared for those people and have recognized that toward the end of life, people with dementia are a lot like a newborn from a functional perspective. Especially with Alzheimer's disease, people get to the point that they can urinate, they can defecate, they can cry, but they can't drink solid, or they can't eat solid foods. They have to drink thickened liquids. They can't roll over on their own. So functionally, they're very much like they were when they came into the world. And it's an absolutely devastating thing for the family. In the several years since then, as I've been working very directly with families all over the country, helping them through this process, I've had a few of them describe going to the doctor and getting a dementia diagnosis as being a little bit like having someone putting them into a boat, taking the oars away and just sort of shoving them out onto the ocean. They have felt helpless. They felt like they desperately wanted answers. They wished there was more that could be done. But instead they were told, well, there's not a lot that we can do. You could take this Aricept and it's probably not going to do much for you, but take it for a while, come back in 6 months and we'll see if you're any worse. And that just feels bad. Well, A Mind for All Seasons and the Summit at Sunland Springs are absolutely driven to find a better way. And we believe that there is a better way. It's called the Enhanced Protocol, and it's research-based. And we're going to spend the rest of our time explaining to you what some of that research is and why we not only believe, but why we know we can make a difference for a lot of people. Many people don't realize that some of the top neurologists in the world in the last few years have said that Alzheimer's should be a lot more rare than it is. It's a largely preventable condition. Some studies show that even over 80% of Alzheimer's cases could be prevented. So the goal today is to help you understand that there is hope for protecting your brain. And if you have a loved one who's already living with dementia, there is absolutely a lot of things that can be tried to help them. And we have many, many cases of people that have had really impressive results. Some of them right there at the summit in your own neighborhood. Well, let's have a little bit of background about Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease gets its name from Dr. Alois Alzheimer, who in 1906 had been following a woman for a few years who had progressive and aggressive cognitive decline. She was only 55 years old when she died, and by the time she died, she had lost a ton of functional ability. She couldn't hardly remember anything. And Dr. Alzheimer did an autopsy and found a pattern of tangles and plaques in her brain that later on would bear the name of Alzheimer's. I've often wondered how he felt to give his name to what arguably is the world's most feared disease. I have talked to so many people in the last 20 years who have said, oh my gosh, Eric, I would get just about anything other than Alzheimer's disease. I would rather have cancer than Alzheimer's. And I think the reason why is that Alzheimer's disease is a slow form of brain death. It starts with memory loss, and then progressively it gets worse and worse until functionally, as I mentioned earlier, we're a lot like a newborn. So it's a loss of identity and a loss of functional ability that is so devastating that nobody would want to go there. You wouldn't want your worst enemy to go there. This is what Alzheimer's disease looks like. On the left, when you compare the healthy brain slice to the image on the right, you can see massive differences. Alzheimer's causes the brain to shrink by 50 to 70% of its volume. And as you can see, there's massive tissue loss throughout. Now, over on the right, in the cartoon image, you see on the bottom left a word called hippocampus. The hippocampus is like the memory control tower of the brain. And I don't care if you remember the term hippocampus, but I do want you to remember that that memory control tower is where Alzheimer's disease tends to start for most people. Well, if the disease starts there, it means that the observable things that we're going to see for most people, at least the first symptoms, are memory related. Unfortunately, most people pass off those memory losses that come early as just normal aging. Now, there is a little bit of cognitive decline as we age. Things slow down when we get into our 30s and the brain is fully formed. We kind of shift from being in sponge mode to slowing down just a little bit and saying, okay, the brain's formed, let's settle into our functional level here. But as we get older and older, quite often we start experiencing some brain fog, and maybe that gets worse and we have a harder time finding our words. And we joke about brain farts and senior moments, but secretly inside, we're worried. It's no laughing matter. And 1 in 3 seniors nowadays dies with Alzheimer's disease. And the rates of Alzheimer's are projected to almost triple by the year 2050. So if you're in the baby boom generation, you're probably more than a little afraid of what could happen. This disease is already impacting so many lives. It's killing tons and tons of people every year, and it's expected to just get worse and worse. Man, if we could do something about that, that would be exciting. And I'm here to tell you, there's a lot that we can do about it. If we're going to understand what we could do, we have to understand what's actually causing the disease and why it is that we don't have a cure. So let me give you an analogy to work with. Most people understand that if you break a bone, your body will grow new bone. And that happens because there's this dynamic balance. Every day we lose some bone cells and we build some bone cells. If we didn't actually break down bone, then we'd all be huge after a while. We'd all look like Andre the Giant. So healthy bone is what happens when the rate of bone breakdown and the rate of bone formation are about equal. Think of the scales of justice. It's like they're carefully balanced. But if we start losing bone cells faster than they're being formed, we get osteoporosis. And there are a lot of things that can cause that. One of the most common is that women who have had a hysterectomy or have lived for quite a while after menopause lose the nourishing supportive hormones, which are crucial for bone health. And in time, that balance tips and they start losing bone cells faster than they're being formed. Osteoporosis. Well, an interesting thing about the hippocampus, the memory control tower in the brain, is that it actually produces new brain cells every day. And this is relatively new information in about the last decade or two. I believe it was Australian researchers who first discovered that the hippocampus produces somewhere around 700 new brain cells every day. Well, how do you get to the point that the hippocampus looks like this if you're producing new brain cells every day? Well, it's just like in osteoporosis. Something tips the balance, and you start losing brain cells faster than they're being formed. In other words, Alzheimer's disease is kind of a synaptoporosis, some people have called it. It's this tipping of the scale toward synapse destruction, and we're losing those brain cells faster than they're being formed. So why don't we have a cure? Why isn't there a pill that you could take to cure this disease? There's been a lot of effort to create one. We've spent truckloads of money on it. Why don't we have the pill? Well, until recently, our approach has been based on two fundamentally flawed assumptions. What are they? Well, first of all, if we just had enough time and enough funding and enough effort to research, that we could find a drug that would prevent or treat Alzheimer's disease. And closely related to that is the belief that amyloid beta protein is the problem with Alzheimer's disease. Starting in the early 1980s, researchers came to believe that amyloid protein is both the cause and the major symptom of Alzheimer's. Amyloid beta protein is what forms the sticky plaques in the brain of an Alzheimer's patient. It forms those plaques between cells, and it makes it really difficult for one cell to talk to the other. It's almost like there's road construction. If you're trying to go from point A to point B, but someone rips up the road and you can't get past there, then you've got a real problem. That's kind of what happens in the brain with these plaques. It sounds logical, doesn't it, that if we could make a drug to get rid of the plaques, that people would get better. Maybe those brain cells could talk to each other. Well, that's not actually what happens. There's no pharmaceutical magic. There have been over 400 drug trials now, average cost of $50 million apiece, and there's only a handful of drugs that are FDA approved for the treatment of Alzheimer's, and none of them work very well. They really aren't game changers. In fact, a recent study showed that if you use two of the most common drugs, Aricept and Namenda, together, and you do it too early in the process, you could actually make someone worse. So, gosh, we just don't have the magic pill. And companies have started to halt their research into Alzheimer's disease. Maybe people have been saying in the last several years, maybe this amyloid hypothesis is all wrong. Dr. Tanzi at Harvard University found recently that amyloid beta protein is actually antimicrobial, and it seems to have kind of a protective role in the brain. Let me give you an example that points out why it is that the amyloid hypothesis could be so problematic. What if every time you got sick, we noticed that your white blood cell count went up? And we didn't understand why that was. We had no idea that that was part of the immune system of your body at work. We just noticed a correlation. You get sick, and so your white cell count goes up. Oh my goodness. What if we made a drug to get rid of those excess white blood cells? Maybe that would be the game changer. And what if we went to work and we invested lots of time and energy into coming up with drugs to kill off excess white blood cells? Well, I think you know what would happen. People would die of diseases that normally they recover from, because that's part of the body's immune system. If we mistake correlation for causation, we can get ourselves into a lot of hot water. Maybe that's what's happened with the amyloid hypothesis. Maybe the more important question is not how do we get rid of the amyloid, it is why is the brain producing excess amyloid in the first place? Well, Dr. Dale Bredesen, who's a highly credentialed researcher that's been studying Alzheimer's disease for the last 30 years and who has over 200 peer-reviewed articles about neurodegenerative conditions to his credit, started noticing in his efforts at UCLA to develop a drug for Alzheimer's that things weren't adding up here. There are actually a lot of factors that affect brain health. And you know about many of the factors that affect brain health. So which one of them would be a game changer? most people know that exercise improves cognitive functioning. Is that a cure for Alzheimer's disease? Well, the way that we've tried to come up with a cure is to pick one variable and test it against a placebo. So, do people who exercise, if they have Alzheimer's symptoms, if they exercise, does the disease go away? Well, there seems to be some cognitive benefit, but no, it's not a cure. What about diet? There's research that shows people who eat a Mediterranean diet have a lower incidence of Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's is nicknamed diabetes of the brain, or diabetes type 3, because about 80% of Alzheimer's patients have major insulin resistance. If you're a diabetic, your risk of Alzheimer's goes through the roof. So could we test something like the Mediterranean diet or other dietary interventions that lower insulin resistance against a placebo or some other way of testing it, some other dietary intervention? Does it turn out to be a cure? No, it doesn't. There's a lot of research that shows that fasting is really important for brain health. Our bodies take out the garbage when we're in a fasted state. And a lot of people eat not only 3 square meals, but they eat snacks in between, and they'll eat a late night snack before they go to bed, and their body never really gets around to taking out the trash. So what if we fasted a little bit more? We know from research that that improves a growth hormone for brain cells called BDNF. So, gee, would that turn Alzheimer's disease around? No, we find that people who are in a fasted state do have a sharpening of the mind, but it's not a cure for Alzheimer's disease. We know that people that have thyroid dysfunction have a much higher incidence of Alzheimer's disease. If we treat the thyroid, do they get better? Well, it's not a cure. We know that people that have copper toxicity, maybe they've got a disease like Wilson's disease that causes elevated copper levels. They have a much higher risk of Alzheimer's. So what if we deal with copper toxicity? Nope, that's not a cure. Dr. Bredesen and his colleagues and other researchers have noticed for a long time that there are so many different variables that affect brain health, but we've been going down the road of testing one thing against a placebo, and that's not getting us anywhere. So he started noticing that, gee, the perfect Alzheimer's drug would have to do all of this stuff. That's a highly technical slide. And we're not going to go through all the ins and outs of it because that's unimportant for this discussion. I wanted you to be able to see that if you were to make the perfect drug, it would have to do this much stuff. There's 45 or 50 things that we would have to deal with. And how can you make a drug that does all that stuff? You really can't. It's kind of like we're trying to patch a roof with a lot of different holes in it, but we're only patching one hole. And then we're testing it. And in a few cases, we can measure, yeah, that house fills up with water a little bit slower when it rains, but doggone it, it still fills up. It only slows things down a little bit. Well, Dr. Bredesen and his colleagues noticed that there's a lot of stuff on this list, many things that affect brain health that are measurable. And he had a different idea. He thought, what if we could measure as many things as possible in one sitting? Just do a really broad panel of labs and measure where the holes in the roof are and try to patch all of the holes at one time. Cancer research has kind of gone that direction. We use multiple modes of therapy to treat cancer nowadays. You used to hear about AIDS all the time in the news. Boy, it wasn't too many decades ago that AIDS was everywhere. And now you don't hear about it as much. People are living a lot longer, better lives with AIDS because researchers found that if you combined a few treatments together, you got a lot better results. Well, brain health is far more complex than AIDS or even cancer in a lot of ways. So Dr. Bredesen and his colleagues thought, what if you address a ton of different factors all at the same time? Well, he took a group of 10 people and he did just that. He measured all those factors. He looked at nutrients, he looked at hormones, he looked at inflammatory markers, he looked at the presence of different brain toxins, he looked at whether someone was sedentary and gee, could we get them exercising? Do they have sleep apnea? Are they sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night? Are they fasting periodically? What's going on with their diet? He started developing a really personalized program for each individual based on what showed up in their lifestyle and in their lab work. And he published the results of that in 2014 in a paper titled Reversal of Cognitive Decline, a Novel Therapeutic Program. That's a pretty provocative title, Reversal of Cognitive Decline. Wow, when's the last time you heard of someone having actual reversal? Well, it was a small study group, and he published another small study, another 10 people in June of 2016. He's since followed up with a case report on 100 people. He has now published 2 New York Times best-selling books about this type of approach. Let me tell you about a couple of the people that show up in this research. One was a 66-year-old man with complaints of memory loss. He had the genetics consistent with Alzheimer's. He had a positive family history of Alzheimer's. He had a PET scan that showed that, yeah, this guy's got Alzheimer's disease. An MRI showed that the memory center of his brain was in the 17th percentile. He had lost a lot of his brain, and functionally, you could see it. He was not doing so well. And yet, once Dr. Bredesen and his colleagues measured all of those factors, developed a really personalized program for him, replacing nutrients that he was deficient in, fixing hormonal deficiencies, getting him exercising, getting him sleeping well, shifting his diet to one that promoted insulin sensitivity instead of insulin resistance. Doing all of these things, after 10 months, this guy's hippocampal volume on an MRI measured in the 75th percentile. And the radiologist that read the report thought he had mixed up the paperwork. He found out he hadn't. It was actually true. So they used a second lab to really study out the MRI. They used a different computer program. And they came back and said, well, we think he actually started in the 10th percentile and wound up in the 90th percentile. Well, I don't care if you're talking about 17th improving to the 75th or the 10th to the 90th. This guy got a lot of his brain back, and functionally, he was doing so much better. That's unprecedented. Well, how about another case study? 69-year-old entrepreneur with 11 years of slow, progressive memory loss. He had a PET scan consistent with Alzheimer's. He had the genetics for it. His California verbal learning test scores deteriorated over time to where he was in the 13th percentile for auditory delayed learning. All that means is that you could give him a list of words and ask him to try really hard to remember those words, and he couldn't do it. Try as he might, he could not recall those words. Well, if you can't do that, that starts to disrupt daily life. And this guy was having a hard time recognizing the faces of his employees at work. He had hired a bunch of assistants to help him get through the day. And things got so bad that his neurologist said, look, you have Alzheimer's disease. You need to sell your business. You need to take legal action to kind of set yourself up for the slow, long goodbye. And you need to accept the fact that your brain is tanking. Well, he didn't want to hear that. He was practically suicidal. And his wife heard about Dr. Bredesen's study, got him involved in it. And after 22 months of treatment, his California verbal learning test scores went up to the 79th percentile. Not only did he not shut down his business, he actually opened another location or 2. And he has continued to run his business successfully. Now, Dr. Bredesen has talked about these case reports in recent years, and they have maintained their functional level and continued to have progressive improvement. That's absolutely unprecedented. And in his report on 100 people, he pointed out that there are many others who have had improvement. Well, over time, in looking at this, we have seen that what gets labeled Alzheimer's disease, this buildup of tangles and plaques, is not the same thing for everybody. Some people have more of an inflammatory kind of dementia. Their inflammatory markers are off the charts. Some people really have a lot of insulin resistance, and that's the biggest driving factor for them. Some people are really lacking in hormones and nutrients, and that seems to be the biggest issue for them. These are little 85-year-old women that have lived for years without hormones, and they're freezing cold, they're on thyroid medication, but it's maybe not optimized, and they're freezing cold in the midst of the hot Arizona summer, and they're sitting there dragging, they don't have a lot of energy, they're freezing cold, and you ask them how they are, and they start crying at the drop of a hat. These people have an atrophic dementia, so they're lacking nutrients and hormones. Some people look like the picture of health. They're relatively young. They don't have the genetics for Alzheimer's, and yet they develop it in their late 40s, early 50s, maybe early 60s. When you do testing on them and you do this broad panel of labs, you find that a lot of things are in really good shape for them. And so you wonder, why on earth do they have all this cognitive decline? And then you start figuring out, oh, they worked in the automotive industry for years and they had their hands in solvents. Or they didn't wear personal protective gear and they sprayed lead-based paint for a long time. Or maybe they worked in the farming industry and they sprayed a lot of herbicides and pesticides and they didn't wear protective gear. These people have had toxic exposures of a variety of kinds. Well, there's a lot of skepticism out there naturally. Anytime something new comes out, we're skeptical of it. We get really used to the status quo as human beings. It gives us something solid to hang on to. Take, for example, the fact that when scientists, well, not even scientists, I guess it was a doctor that first said, way back when the Panama Canal was being built, that maybe yellow fever and malaria were spreading because of mosquitoes. Well, the general medical community laughed at that doctor and said, no, everybody knows it's putrefied air. We've known for a long time it's putrefied air. It took 30 years for the general medical establishment to accept that indeed mosquitoes spread yellow fever and malaria. Well, you might think, oh, we live in more enlightened times nowadays. We figure this stuff out sooner. We use the scientific method really well. It was not too many years ago that some Australian doctors stepped out and said, hey, we're pretty sure that H. pylori bacteria is the major cause of stomach ulcers. And when they presented that at a conference, they were laughed at. And the doctor said, no, it's stress related. We know that. We know it's stress related. Well, instead, they took about 10 years to try to amass enough evidence to convince the general medical community that H. pylori bacteria does it. And the thing that finally tipped the scale is that the lead researcher walked into the lab one day and said, I'm tired of people not believing this. I'm going to prove once and for all that H. pylori bacteria causes stomach ulcers. He grabbed a beaker teeming with bacteria. Down the hatch it went. Within a few days, he had the classic early symptoms of stomach ulcers, and he cured himself with a round of antibiotics. That tipped the scale. So skeptics tend to say, there's no cure or treatment. We've known that for decades. This is kind of anecdotal stuff. These are case reports. Where's the double-blind placebo-controlled study? It's snake oil. I don't know. You can't believe everything that you hear. There's too small of a study group, and the studies need to be reproduced. Well, those last two, I definitely agree with. We need to do this with a lot of people. Well, there's actually a lot more research than you would think out there. The Finnish Geriatric trial showed that if you just take a few modes of intervention, dietary guidance, physical activity, socialization, cognitive training, you're kind of doing brain games, that sort of thing, and you really monitor and manage metabolic and vascular risk factors, people do better. There was a large number of people in the study, over 1,000, and it went for 2 years, and there was an only 11% dropout rate. And that's pretty exciting for people to look at and say, oh my gosh, you can make a difference. I did an experiment one day when I was sitting in the Sky Harbor Airport. I was getting ready to come out to the summit and work with their team. And I thought, I'm just going to open up the government site for published research, and I'm going to look up whatever I can find that has to do with the elements of this approach. So I looked up things like hormones and brain health, exercise and brain health, sleep and brain health, on and on and on. Man, I did that and I found tons and tons of research articles, more than I could possibly imagine, hundreds of them. Well, Dr. Bredesen recognized that a lot of doctors have done bits and pieces of this approach for many years. Any doctor could do hormone replacement if they chose to. Any doctor could really manage thyroid carefully, and many do. Any doctor could replace nutrients and hormones and measure them. Any doctor could test for the presence of toxic exposures and do something about it. And so he decided to just start training practitioners how to combine all those things together. This picture that you see on the screen is of Randy Vaudry. He's my business partner and the chief medical officer of A Mind for All Seasons. And we took Dr. Bredesen's protocol and built systems and tools and processes around it to help people. And we started noticing that people were really having improvement when we used a comprehensive dementia analysis. So instead of just doing a pencil and paper test and we give you a diagnosis, maybe we do a little bit of brain imaging and we say, well, here's a medication. It's probably not going to do much for you. Good luck. Come back in 6 months and we'll see if you're any worse. We do a lot of baseline testing, and then we look at all your lab work, and we assign a coach to work with you, and we guide you through this whole process that allows you to address as many holes in the roof as we can possibly find. And over time, we found that people did a lot better with this type of functional medicine approach. We're really trying to get to the root causes of cognitive decline. Well, this functional medicine approach, this idea of figuring out what's causing amyloid beta to build up instead of just trying to get rid of it, has been really, really valuable. And I could talk all day about hundreds of clients that we've now worked with who have had similar improvement to what Dr. Bredesen talks about in his case reports. But not everybody that Randy and I have worked with have shown that kind of impressive improvement. And so getting back to the analogy of the scale here, what tips the scale? Lots of factors tip us toward cognitive decline. And if we can put many things on the counterbalancing side at once, we're going to tip a lot better back toward brain health than if we just put one thing and measure it against placebo. When we looked at not everybody improving as much as others, Randy and I started saying, what else needs to be on the counterbalancing side of the equation? Surely there's more research being done in terms of brain health. And we started looking at more complementary integrative medicine types of approaches. These are approaches that use things like energy medicine, using light to affect the body. There's actually a surprising amount of research on this. Major research institutions have studied out how all sorts of different wavelengths of light affect the body. And there are a lot of different medical devices that do everything from boosting blood flow to changing brainwave states to calming inflammation to improving energy production, ATP production to be technical. And Randy and I started goofing around with these devices saying, oh my gosh, there's stuff, much of which is either FDA approved or FDA registered. Some of these things have been around for a long, long time. What if we add some of those therapies in? What about the idea of photosynthesis in the body? We all know about photosynthesis with plants. It allows plants to grow and produce energy, and it kind of occurs in the body. When sunlight hits the body, we make vitamin D. We turn cholesterol into vitamin D. We use certain wavelengths of light in the blue wavelengths to impact babies that have jaundice because their liver's not processing bilirubin like it should. And blue light turns that around. We use certain wavelengths of light for diseases like psoriasis or vitiligo. This is actually a light box that Randy's mother uses for her psoriasis. So different wavelengths of light affect us in different ways. Well, this man, Dr. Michael Hamblin, who runs the Wellman Center for Photomedicine at Harvard Medical School, is considered the father of using light to change how the body reacts and how it functions. Photobiomodulation, where we're using light to affect a living organism. Well, here's a guy that's in the BYU Football Hall of Fame. He was a linebacker, and unfortunately, by the time he got into his 40s, all of those hits that he took to the head had taken their toll on his brain. And he was getting irritated and agitated with his wife. He wasn't remembering things as well. He was having real problems, and it was affecting his life dramatically. He enrolled in a research study at the Boston VA, where they used a light helmet. They used specific wavelengths of red and near infrared light. And as a result of the treatment, his symptoms largely went away. And as this newspaper article points out, if you look at the box at the bottom, it says an MRI had scanned Larry's brain before and after his treatments. In the before photos, dark spots abound, indicating a lack of brain activity. In the after photos, there are brighter colors and lightness. So he was able to improve using a helmet like this, putting specific wavelengths of light to the brain that turned on energy production and calmed inflammation. If you've had a lot of hits to the head, calming inflammation is likely to be very helpful. Those specific wavelengths of red light also improve not only energy production, but oxygen flow and antioxidant levels. Well, Randy and I looked at that and went, that's got to be helpful. And so we started getting different red light devices. There are full body devices that you can use. This one's actually used by the US Olympic team because it calms inflammation so much after a workout. You can have full body devices that you stand in front of. Many of these are FDA registered devices, and they're totally safe. There aren't contraindications. Anybody could do this. And as we started adding in some of these devices, people that were doing just the core of what Dr. Bredesen found and weren't having much more than stability actually started showing impressive improvements. We saw people that quit declining, which was a victory, but they weren't talking much and they weren't finding their words very well. They started improving and their word retrieval improved. They started carrying on conversations again. And so we thought, well, what else could we do? What if we could affect brainwave patterns? People with Alzheimer's have a hard time sleeping. And there are devices like the one you see on the screen that can help us shift brain waves in such a way as to help the brain get into the longer brain waves that you tend to have when you're sleeping. Or you could shift the brain waves to more of a calm, relaxed state so that people that get agitated normally would calm down. We've had massive success with that. At the summit at Sunland Springs, Robeson, who you'll meet kind of on the end of this webinar, has used this device with a lot of different residents, and he's seen that many of them don't have to use antipsychotic medication late in the day to calm challenging behavior, because we can use a device like this to shift the brain waves to an alpha wave state that's just calming. Well, that's non-invasive. It's not a drug. It's not going to hurt anybody unless you have a seizure disorder. That could be a contraindication. But it makes a difference. So we goofed around with that. This device that you see in the background that I'm standing next to in this picture allows us to improve the amount of oxygen getting to the brain by about 30%. It also improves the body's ability to release toxins again and to improve oxygen transfer across the cell membrane. Well, all of that starts to sound a little bit technical, but what I'm trying to describe is that it's possible to put together kind of a gym for the brain. Think about going to a gym, and instead of going station to station and doing arm curls at one station and the bench press at another station and leg lifts at another station, you're going to one station to use red light therapy to improve energy production and calm inflammation. And you're going to another station to boost blood flow and oxygenation to the brain by about 30%. And you're exercising, which has known cognitive benefits. And then you go to another station where you're getting your brain waves shifted to just the right state so that you can be calm and focused. And that also improves blood flow. I hope you're getting the picture here that there are so many different interventions that could be added on that counterbalancing side of the scale. So what we call the enhanced protocol takes everything that Dr. Bredesen does, this programmatic approach, and it builds tools and systems and processes around it. You get a memory coach that guides you through the whole process. At the summit, Robeson is the memory coach. His role is to take you by the hand and say, let's get your lab work done. Let's do some baseline cognitive testing. Let's look at your health history and figure out what's actually driving your decline. Oh, and let's get you involved using some of these research-based, often FDA-registered medical devices that do amazing things for your body, so that when we're trying to tip that scale back toward synapse growth instead of destruction, we're tipping the scale faster. We're helping you improve more. That's when the magic happens. So what you get in the enhanced protocol is a very comprehensive analysis of over 45 factors that are affecting your brain health. And we put that into a report that we call a roadmap. It tells you how to get from point A to point B. So it's just like a map that you pull out when you're going on a road trip that says, turn here, go there, take this highway, and you're going to end up at the right destination. And to do that, we have to look at the medications you're taking. We have to look at your health history. We have to look at things that maybe providers have missed, because medicine has sort of shifted into diagnosing and treating symptoms instead of figuring out the root cause of the problem. And we've shifted further into treating organs instead of treating the system. You go to the liver doctor for liver problems. You go to the heart doctor for heart problems. You go to the neurologist for brain problems. You go to the skin doctor for skin problems, and so on. And we feel like the human body is a system, and we got to look at what's happening in all the parts of the system. Well, that gets really complex. So we boil it down into a simple daily checklist. And so if you're working with Robeson there at the summit, he presents you with a checklist along with your report, and you have kind of the user manual for your body, and then a little checklist. So just like an airline pilot would get into the cockpit and say, okay, check, check, check with all the pre-flight stuff, so that he or she can get you from point A to point B. You sit down with your daily checklist and say, all right, I took my vitamin D because I'm really deficient in that, and this is exactly how much I have to take. And I'm taking that neurological hormone, check. I've replaced magnesium because I'm really deficient there. I've used my bioidentical hormone cream because I'm totally deficient in my sex hormones, and on and on and on. You go through your checklist and you're on track. He's going to provide dietary coaching and support, because we've got to get eating in brain healthy ways. Food is fuel. Too many people use food as a reward, but it's just fuel. And we've got to figure out how to give you the right fuel for how your engine runs. Not everybody's going to need to eat in exactly the same way. There's not one specific diet that's going to fix everything for everyone. We just ran into that this week. We had a lady come here to our offices in Idaho for a 2-week intensive program. And because of her genetics, we shifted her to a really low carbohydrate diet. But she's had chronic diarrhea for a long time. Irritable bowel syndrome. That means she's got a lot of inflammation in her system, and the gut and the brain talk to each other. Well, how are we going to calm that down? She didn't respond as well as she needed to a low carb diet. So now we've shifted her to an even more specialized diet, and we're going to monitor that for a couple of weeks and see how she does. That's exactly what a memory coach like Robeson will do for you. You also need some coaching in how to increase physical activity. If you've been sedentary for the last 40 years, or your mother or father has, or your spouse has, that's going to look a little bit different than if you're already a marathon runner and you've got cognitive problems. We train families who are caring for loved ones with dementia how to interact with them using a proprietary system that I developed years ago called the Vital 5 Pillars. These are the 5 key things that get you through most of the challenges that you face in the day. If we can help families interact better with their loved ones and understand what makes them tick, while at the same time addressing medical aspects that are driving their decline, we get a lot better results. Why do we do all this stuff? Well, the goal is to help people keep their loved ones home as long as possible. And to do that, we've got to address all these different factors. Well, the enhanced protocol also allows you to contact your coach anytime you need, and you get support from someone that's really trained to do this stuff. And you use these medical devices to amplify your body's ability to heal. And we give you some preferred pricing on supplements because they get expensive, so we try to deal with all of that. Well, you recall my grandparents and their story, which is like millions of other people's story. But what about a different story? Let me introduce you to a few people who will briefly tell us about their experiences with the enhanced protocol and some of the things that they've went through.
What do you notice is the biggest difference since starting the protocol?
I can talk without having to not be able to find my words.
Yeah, before that was a real challenge, wasn't it?
Yes, I had almost decided I wasn't going to talk anymore to anybody because I couldn't talk decent. And my independence means a lot to me.
If someone was a senior, your age, and struggling with memory, but they were hesitant to do something like you've done, what kind of encouragement would you give to them?
I would tell them to do it.
When you went and saw a neurologist, what types of things did the neurologist offer you?
Absolutely nothing. He offered me a pill, but he wasn't sure the pill worked, and he didn't care if I went and got it or not.
What prompted you to come see me to talk about memory?
I was losing my memory.
And what has been the result?
Oh, it's been a huge change. My memory's better. I'm much more cognitive, which makes me a happy person.
What measurement do you use to show that your memory's better? Like, how do you track that?
Well, in my day-to-day living, I don't have to write down everything to remember it.
Okay.
My schedule, those kind of things.
Wonderful. And if there was anyone that was worried, like if someone was thinking, I feel like I'm losing my memory and I've heard that there's an enhanced protocol that we could do, but I'm hesitant, what would you say to them?
I would say by all means try it.
Be doing something and then all of a sudden I couldn't put it together what I was trying to do. Something simple like making a cup of coffee or something. It would just be, and I could stop and think and kind of calm down and get it, but it would really bother me. And then I would just forget ordinary everyday things like how to turn the TV on and off or how to make a call on my phone that I'd done 100 times, and I could usually think about it and come up with it, but it was scary.
Since you started our enhanced protocol, tell me what's different now.
I really noticed I don't have the confusion, maybe once in a great while, but it's not the everyday thing. And
what has been the best part of this protocol?
well, I feel better, and I remember better, and I lost weight.
I was at a point where I was retreating, I think, socially from other people because I was having a great deal of difficulty finding words, and my speech was obviously impaired. I also was having trouble with numbers, which I couldn't remember my telephone number or my address.
What are some of the things that you have noticed, Ruth, as far as outcomes in your experience?
Well, I have found that I'm much more comfortable in social situations, which is very important to me, to have that ability to communicate with other people. I'm doing better in terms of memory of numbers, and I can now remember my telephone number and my address, which is a big deal to me. I mean, after years of managing budgets in millions of dollars and remembering every line item, I could not remember my telephone number and address. So I can now. That for me somehow is a major achievement, and I'm progressing. I do believe that I'm going to get much better.
So what do you
Well, I don't know about you, but I think that's really exciting. And we've even seen cases where people had cognitive scores in the low to mid-teens and improved to the mid-20s, even to 30 out of 30. There was a gentleman at the summit that was actually able to go from 16 out of 30 on a cognitive test to 30 out of 30 and move back home. So our goal at the summit is to help as many people as possible not need to move into the community, but to offer a service that helps people maintain their independence and their brain health. If that's not in the cards, then maybe we can help you move in, get some therapy, and move back home. If that's not in the cards, maybe we can keep you out of memory care. If that's not in the cards, let's keep you off antipsychotic medication, more functional, remembering family members, even if a person still needs 24/7 care. Well, I bet you have some questions. So I'm going to let Lori fire off any of your questions, and we'll take those for the next few minutes as we wrap up. Thanks.
Eric, thank you so much. Watching those testimonials always just brings it home to make you realize that is somebody's mom or their wife, their loved one, that it's really making a huge difference in their life. We do have something exciting that's happening at the summit, and that is the ability for us to be able to offer the coaching program, treatment program for outpatient services. And that is going to be told by Robeson. Robeson, why don't you tell us a little bit about the 6-month program that we're offering?
Thank you, Lori. So we are starting in October, beginning a 6-month outpatient program. We're looking for just 10 people to join this program. The beauty part of engaging in this program in a group setting is it gives one more tool to engage, to make sure that it sticks. Because as Eric was saying with the person who is changing their diet, well, if it's one thing to, do it for a week, but it's another to do it for the rest of your life. And to build those habits takes quite a bit of work and quite a bit of time. I've heard 45 days, I've heard 90 days, and it's hard to do. I mean, if you look at the number of people who achieve their New Year's resolutions every year, well, if you achieve them, you would have to stop making them. I believe that I saw a study it was 92%, but I sadly think it's probably higher of people fail to achieve their New Year's resolutions. So the first step of this is to, of course, do the lab work and do the interview to really hone down on all of those factors that Eric just talked about that can cause cognitive decline. Of course, we'll come back with the roadmap that is individualized to you, and we will set about implementing that, of course, with my assistance and then some group video chats as well to gain accountability and assistance from your fellow enrollees. And of course, we also have access to our training devices here at the summit. So you can come to the summit without having to be a resident.
That's great, Robeson. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to answer any additional questions in this last minute or two that we have. Eric, how about you take this one? The question came up of there's dementia that is on both sides of my family. I feel like I'm just waiting for the shoe to drop. Is there something that can be done now?
There's so much that can be done now. That's a great question. And I would just remind the audience that genetics might load the gun, but your choices pull the trigger. And the enhanced protocol is designed to identify all the factors that we know of that really affect brain health. And if you look at how synapse destruction occurs, that it happens slowly over time, and something tips us toward losing brain cells faster than they're being formed, there's a lot that we can do to tip it back the other way before the destruction gets to the point that it's a massive problem. So it makes a really, really big difference if we focus on doing the right things early. Dr. Bredesen was asked, hey, what's the number one thing that I could do to protect my brain so that I don't go down the path of my parents? And his answer to that was, get your lab work done. Figure out what's actually going on internally that will drive decline and cause a problem if you don't correct it early. So definitely early intervention, and the kind of program that you're offering there at the summit is a great way for people to get a jump on improving their brain health.
That's great, thank you. One more thing you can also take advantage of, especially right now where we are at our computers and in our homes, is a mental wellness screening with Robeson. You can schedule that one-on-one with his contact information on the screen, or you can just email me back if you received the invitation to this webinar. And we can go ahead and set up a screening for you in the comfort of your own home, or maybe if you're not quite ready to have that loved one taken to the doctor, but you just want to kind of see where things are at, this is a great time to be able to take advantage of that without having to go through the process of taking someone to the doctor, because that could be overwhelming. But we certainly do appreciate everybody joining us today. Thank you, Eric and Robeson, for joining in on the conversation. You will be receiving the 10 tips to improving your brain health in an email, so look for that. And stay tuned for future webinars offered by the Summit and A Mind for All Seasons. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lori.